A dynasty of gods and siblings. The story of the Ptolemies. When Alexander the Great died in 323 BCE, the world he had conquered shattered like glass. His generals, men who had marched with him across deserts, into Persia, through the mountains of India, scrambled to seize pieces of his empire for themselves. Some took Asia, others Macedonia or the Near East. But one man, quiet and calculating, saw Egypt as the jewel worth holding. His name was Ptolemy, son of Lagus, a Macedonian general. While others fought and bled for greater prizes, he secured the Nile. By 305 BCE, he crowned himself pharaoh, founding a dynasty that would last nearly 3 centuries and leave behind one of the strangest and most spectacular legacies in history. The Ptolemies were Greeks ruling Egypt, a paradox from the start. They built their capital at Alexandria, a city of marble palaces, theaters, temples, and the famous lighthouse, the Pharos, one of the 7 wonders. Greek was their tongue, Greek their manners, and Greek their view of the world. Yet they wore the double crown of the pharaohs, sacrificed to Egyptian gods, and carved their names in hieroglyphs on temple walls beside figures of Horus and Isis. They claimed to be heirs both of Alexander and of the pharaohs who had ruled for 3,000 years. But it was in their private lives, in their marriages, that the Ptolemies most strikingly fused Greece with Egypt. For the Greeks, the greatest taboo was incest. Brothers and sisters might live under the same roof, but never in the same bed. Yet for the Egyptians, the marriage of divine siblings was sacred. Osiris and Isis were brother and sister, husband and wife. So too were the sky god Arsinoe and the earth god Geb. For centuries, Egyptian pharaohs had occasionally married sisters to preserve the royal bloodline. To the Ptolemies, desperate for legitimacy in a foreign land, that precedent proved irresistible. And so began a dynasty of sibling lovers, where queens were also sisters, nieces, and sometimes daughters, where royal blood was guarded with almost paranoid zeal, and where the family dinner table could become a battlefield of poison, daggers, and betrayal. The first generation, Ptolemy I, founder of the dynasty, was too practical to marry his sister. He had no need. His power was secure, his generals loyal, his claim bolstered by the possession of Alexander's embalmed body, which he had stolen and paraded through the streets of Memphis as if to declare himself custodian of the conqueror's legacy. His queen was Berenice, a Macedonian noblewoman. Their children were Greeks through and through. But his son, Ptolemy II Philadelphus, faced a more complicated problem. By his time, the dynasty's Greek heritage was less of an asset than a burden. The native Egyptians saw their rulers as foreign interlopers, their crowns resting uneasily on heads that spoke the wrong tongue and worshipped foreign gods. To bridge the gap, Ptolemy II turned to Egypt's oldest tradition, the divine marriage of siblings. He wed his sister Arsinoe II, a woman of formidable intelligence and ambition. Arsinoe had already been married twice, first to King Lysimachus of Thrace, then briefly to her half-brother Ptolemy Ceraunus, who had murdered her children. When she returned to Egypt and married her full brother, the world gasped. The Greeks called them the Philadelphoi, the sibling lovers, half in awe, half in disgust. But in Egypt, the message was clear. The king and queen were Osiris and Isis reborn. Together, they embodied divine kingship. Coins bore their twin portraits. Temples honored them as a sacred pair. This marriage, shocking though it was, set the precedent. From then on, the Ptolemies turned inward, marrying sisters, brothers, nieces, even occasionally daughters, to keep their bloodline uncontaminated by outsiders. What had once been taboo became dynastic tradition. Ritualized incest. Over the centuries, the pattern repeated. Ptolemy IV married his sister Arsinoe III. Ptolemy VI married Cleopatra II, who in turn saw her daughter Cleopatra III wed her own uncle, Ptolemy VIII. Cleopatra VII, the last of the dynasty, was forced by custom to marry her younger brothers, Ptolemy XIII and later Ptolemy XIV. This was no accident of passion. It was politics, ritual, and propaganda rolled into one. By marrying sisters, the kings kept foreign dynasties at bay. No ambitious Macedonian nobleman could claim the throne through marriage to a Ptolemaic princess, because the princesses married their brothers. Power remained locked within the family, for better or worse. The propaganda was equally powerful. The people of Egypt were taught to see their rulers not as mortals, but as gods. When the king and queen appeared in procession, clad in golden diadems, They were Isis and Osiris, Horus and Uther. Priests honored them with hymns, statues, and festivals. To question the incestuous union was to question divine law itself. Yet behind this facade of divinity, the royal family seethed with jealousy, hatred, and betrayal. Sibling marriage, meant to unify, often tore the family apart. Brothers killed sisters, sisters plotted against brothers, mothers warred with their own children. The intimacy of marriage gave way to the intimacy of murder. Court life and daily rituals. The Ptolemaic court in Alexandria was a stage where power, religion, and spectacle intertwined. A day in the palace illustrated the dynasty's contradictions. Luxury masked danger, scholarship coexisted with intrigue, and every act was performative. Morning. The royal day began with ceremonial audiences. Courtiers, scribes, and priests gathered in colonnaded halls adorned with mosaics combining Greek and Egyptian motifs. Reports of taxes, grain shipments, and foreign ambassadors were read aloud, accompanied by incense and ritual offerings. The king and queen, dressed in pharaonic regalia with Greek accents, presented themselves as divine intermediaries, bridging mortal and celestial spheres. Midday. Knowledge became a tool of prestige. In the Mausian, scholars debated mathematics, astronomy, and medicine. Eratosthenes measured Earth's circumference. Herophilos dissected human bodies to advance anatomical knowledge, and Euclid taught geometry that would endure millennia. Meanwhile, exotic animals, such as giraffes, elephants, and lions, roamed palace gardens, paraded as symbols of Ptolemaic power and reach. Visitors from across the Mediterranean marveled at this display of both wealth and intellectual sophistication. Evening. Banquets that were more of an exhibition of excess and strategy. Gold and silver vessels gleamed on tables overflowing with delicacies, roasted goose, figs, honey cakes, imported wines, and rare spices. Performers recited Greek plays while dancers imitated Egyptian rituals, creating a fusion that reflected the dynasty's dual identity. The king and queen, as divine siblings, were both rulers and symbols. Between courses, advisors whispered of succession and intrigue. Political machinations were as carefully staged as the entertainment. Midnight. The palace never truly slept. Poisons were concocted, alliances plotted, and messages sent to distant provinces. Sibling spouses often became rivals. The very institution meant to consolidate power sometimes seeded betrayal. Courtiers walked a fine line between loyalty and survival. For in a family where brother and sister could also be spouse and enemy, nothing could be taken for granted. The king and queen, as divine siblings, were both rulers and symbols. Between courses, advisors whispered of succession and intrigue. Political machinations were as carefully staged as the entertainment. Midnight. The palace never truly slept. Poisons were concocted, alliances plotted, and messages sent to distant provinces. Sibling spouses often became rivals. The very institution meant to consolidate power sometimes seeded betrayal. Courtiers walked a fine line between loyalty and survival. For in a family where brother and sister could also be spouse and enemy, nothing could be taken for granted. Blood and poison in the palace. The Ptolemaic court became a stage for some of the most spectacular feuds in history. Ptolemy IV, notorious for his cruelty, was rumored to have poisoned his own relatives to secure the throne. His marriage to Arsinoe III ended not in harmony but in her assassination, ordered by courtiers after his death to keep her from seizing power. Later, Ptolemy VIII Eudes II, known to his subjects as Physcon, the pot-belly, married his sister Cleopatra II. But he grew infatuated with her daughter, Cleopatra III, and married her as well, making mother and daughter his simultaneous queens. What began as a grotesque family arrangement erupted into open civil war. Cleopatra II, enraged by betrayal, raised armies against her brother husband, while Cleopatra III schemed to elevate her own children. At one point, Ptolemy VIII allegedly killed his own son and sent the dismembered body in a box to Cleopatra II as a twisted gift. Few dynasties matched the Ptolemies for sheer theatrical brutality. To outsiders, the spectacle was grotesque. To Romans and Greeks, it confirmed every suspicion about Eastern decadence. Incest, poisonings, civil war. The dynasty seemed a grotesque parody of monarchy. And yet, for all its dysfunction, it endured. The splendor of Alexandria. Amid the bloodshed, The Ptolemies presided over a kingdom of extraordinary wealth and brilliance. Alexandria, their capital, became the jewel of the Mediterranean. Its harbor teemed with ships from every corner of the known world, grain from the Nile, spices from Arabia, papyrus scrolls destined for the Great Library. The Library of Alexandria was the greatest repository of knowledge in antiquity. Ptolemaic agents scoured the seas for books. Any ship docking in Alexandria had its scrolls confiscated and copied. The originals went to the library, the copies to the owners. Within its halls worked scholars like Euclid, who wrote his Elements of Geometry, Eratosthenes, who calculated the circumference of the earth with remarkable precision, and Herophilos, who dissected human bodies to study anatomy. The Mauseon, or museum, attached to the library, was a center of research and debate. Poets, philosophers, and scientists lived there under royal patronage, dining at the king's expense. Knowledge became a tool of propaganda, proof that the Ptolemies were not only kings but patrons of civilization. Their wealth was legendary. Egypt's fertile Nile Valley produced grain on a scale unmatched in the ancient world. The Ptolemies exported it to Greece, the Aegean, and later Rome, securing both riches and influence. Monumental temples rose along the Nile, built in traditional Egyptian style but inscribed with Greek royal names. The Pharos Lighthouse, towering over Alexandria's harbor, became a symbol of their grandeur, its flame guiding ships from miles away. And yet, beneath the marble and gold, the dynasty remained a house divided, gnawed at by the very marriages meant to preserve it. Cleopatra VII, the last pharaoh. The most famous Ptolemy of all was Cleopatra VII, born in 69 BCE. Unlike many of her predecessors, she was not content to be a puppet queen or ceremonial consort. She was clever, charismatic, and politically astute. She spoke Egyptian, the first of her dynasty to do so fluently, and cultivated an image as the living Isis. By custom, she married her younger brother, Ptolemy XIII, and later another brother, Ptolemy XIV. These marriages were political formalities, empty shells required by tradition. Cleopatra ruled not as a passive queen but as an active sovereign, maneuvering through Egypt's treacherous politics with skill. Her true alliances lay outside the dynasty. She seduced and allied with Julius Caesar, bearing him a son, Caesarion. After Caesar's assassination, she turned to Mark Antony, whose power rivaled that of Octavian in Rome. Together, Cleopatra and Antony envisioned a new empire, a fusion of Rome and Egypt, East and West. Octavian, later Augustus. This was intolerable. He waged war not only on Antony but on Cleopatra herself, portraying her as a seductress who had bewitched a Roman nobleman. Their defeat at Actium in 31 BCE sealed the dynasty's fate. When Octavian entered Alexandria, Cleopatra chose death over humiliation, famously ending her life by poison, perhaps by the bite of an asp. With her died the last of the Ptolemies, and with her ended the practice of sibling marriage in Egypt. Blood and lineage, birth defects and sibling marriage in the Ptolemaic Dynasty. When the Ptolemaic Dynasty of Egypt embraced sibling marriage as a hallmark of royal identity, they inherited not only the aura of divinity but also the biological risks of inbreeding. The practice, which began in earnest with Ptolemy II and his sister Arsinoe II in the 3rd century BCE, continued for nearly 300 years. To the Ptolemies, marrying within the family reinforced their sacred status, prevented foreign dynasties from intruding, and aligned them with the Egyptian gods Isis and Osiris. Yet modern readers inevitably ask a more practical question. Did these sibling unions lead to the birth defects that genetics would predict? The short answer is that, while there are scattered hints of frailty, early deaths, and eccentric behavior within the dynasty, the historical record does not provide direct evidence of the kinds of congenital malformations one might expect from centuries of close inbreeding. Instead, what we find is a more complicated story, one shaped as much by political violence, propaganda, and the limits of ancient medicine as by genetics. Inbreeding and its risks. From the perspective of modern genetics, the dangers of consanguineous marriage are clear. The closer the genetic relationship between parents, the greater the chance that harmful recessive traits will be expressed in their children. Brother-sister unions, at the extreme end, are estimated to carry a 25% chance of producing offspring affected by recessive disorders. Across generations, repeated incest magnifies the risk, reducing genetic diversity and making inherited conditions more likely to appear. This was not understood in antiquity, but the biological consequences were no less real. Ancient dynasties that practiced sibling marriage, most famously the Ptolemies in Egypt and later the Incas in Peru, risked narrowing their genetic pool to dangerous levels. For the Ptolemies, this raises the question, what signs, if any, do we see in their lineage? The historical evidence. Unfortunately, the sources for Ptolemaic health and physical appearance are sparse. Ancient writers like Plutarch, Strabo, and Polybius commented freely on the dynasty's politics, scandals, and extravagances, but they rarely described physical abnormalities in detail. Statues and coins depict rulers with idealized features, employing artistic conventions rather than medical documentation. Still, a few observations can be made. Early deaths. Several Ptolemaic rulers died young, though the causes are uncertain. Ptolemy IV, for example, died in his 30s, while others perished in childhood. Yet in an age without antibiotics or modern healthcare, early death was common even among elites, making it difficult to link directly to inbreeding. Obesity and unusual body types. Ptolemy VIII, nicknamed Fiskin, pot-belly, was notoriously obese. Ancient writers mock his appearance, describing him as grotesque and gluttonous. While obesity alone is not a genetic defect, the nickname suggests that at least some rulers were viewed as physically atypical. Whether this was due to lifestyle or inherited conditions is uncertain. Mental instability and cruelty. Several Ptolemies displayed extreme cruelty, paranoia, or erratic behavior. Ptolemy VIII's dismemberment of his own son, Cleopatra II's wars against her brother husband, and the violent feud between mothers and children raise questions about possible hereditary psychological issues. Yet here, too, politics must be considered. Absolute power, combined with constant palace intrigue, can distort behavior even without genetic influence. Roman and Greek propaganda. Much of what we know about the Ptolemies comes filtered through hostile Roman sources, who relish portraying them as decadent, deformed, and corrupt. Cleopatra VII, for instance, was said by some to have bewitched men with irresistible beauty, while others dismissed her as physically unremarkable, suggesting that perception was shaped more by politics than fact. Negative depictions of their bodies or minds may reflect propaganda rather than medical reality. Comparative evidence from Egyptian society. The Ptolemies did not invent sibling marriage in Egypt. Native pharaohs occasionally married sisters or half-sisters to keep the royal line pure. Even beyond the palace, census documents from Roman Egypt show that sibling marriage among commoners, while not universal, was practiced at a surprising rate, perhaps 10 to 20% in some villages of the Fayum region. If inbreeding had produced widespread visible deformities, one might expect stronger commentary in the ancient sources. The absence of such evidence suggests that while risks existed, they were not always dramatic or easily observable. In many cases, inbreeding increases infant mortality or produces subtle genetic disorders rather than striking physical deformities. Infants who were stillborn or died young may simply have disappeared from the record. The case of Cleopatra VII. Cleopatra VII, the last of the dynasty, is an interesting case. As the daughter of Ptolemy XII elites, whose own parentage likely involved sibling marriage, she may have carried the compounded risks of inbreeding. Yet she lived to 39, bore several healthy children, Caesar by Julius Caesar, and 3 children by Mark Antony, and was described as intelligent, charismatic, and multilingual. Her survival and vitality suggest that the dynasty had not entirely succumbed to genetic decline. Her son Caesar, however, was executed by Octavian before reaching adulthood, so we have no evidence of his long-term health. The children she bore with Antony survived into adulthood, but they were taken to Rome and raised there, leaving little record of their later physical conditions. Why evidence is elusive? There are several reasons why clear evidence of birth defects among the Ptolemies is lacking. A selective survival. Infants who suffered severe genetic defects likely died at or before birth and were not recorded in royal annals. Idealized imagery. Art and coinage emphasize divine perfection, not realism. A political spin. Enemies exaggerated or invented physical oddities to discredit rulers, while loyal subjects concealed or ignored them. Overlap with lifestyle diseases. Obesity, gout, and other conditions linked to wealth may have obscured any genetic disorders. Between gods and genetics. The Ptolemies styled themselves as gods, divine siblings walking among mortals. Their marriages to brothers and sisters symbolized purity and legitimacy, binding them to the sacred traditions of Egypt. From the perspective of modern genetics, such unions were fraught with risk. Yet the historical record provides little firm evidence of catastrophic birth defects within the dynasty. What we see instead is a family prone to early deaths, occasional obesity, and violent instability patterns that could result from inbreeding, but also from the brutal politics of palace life, the excesses of luxury, and the distortions of propaganda. In the end, the tragedy of the Ptolemies was not so much biological as political. Their sibling marriages, designed to guard their divine status, trapped them in a cycle of insularity, rivalry, and paranoia. If birth defects did afflict them, they were hidden beneath the greater scars of betrayal, civil war, and conquest. Cleopatra's death in 30 BCE ended not only the dynasty, but also the experiment in royal incest that had defined it. The Ptolemies leave us with an enigma, a dynasty that sought immortality in divine unions, yet left behind no clear medical record of its genetic toll. Whether their blood carried hidden weaknesses or not, their story reminds us that the dangers of inbreeding are not only biological. Power, when confined too tightly within a family, can be just as destructive as any gene. Afterlives of Ptolemaic incest, influence and memory. When Cleopatra VII died in 30 BCE, the Ptolemaic dynasty vanished, but the memory of its eccentricities endured. Chief among these was the practice of sibling marriage, which lingered as a defining symbol of Ptolemaic rule in later imagination. Roman reactions. The Romans, who absorbed Egypt into their empire, were fascinated and repelled by the Ptolemies. To them, sibling marriage was a marker of foreign decadence, a symptom of the corruption that made monarchies unfit compared to the supposed rationality of the Roman Republic. Writers like Plutarch and Cassius Dio painted lurid pictures of Alexandria as a city of luxury and vice, where kings married their sisters and poisoned their rivals amid golden banquets. Cleopatra herself became a central figure in this narrative. Romans portrayed her less as a shrewd stateswoman than as a seductress who used her body and her dynasty's incestuous traditions to ensnare Caesar and Antony. In Roman propaganda, sibling marriage became shorthand for the excess and instability of Egypt, justifying Augustus's conquest as a triumph of Roman virtue over Eastern corruption. Influence beyond Egypt. Though the Ptolemies' specific tradition of sibling marriage died with them, echoes appeared elsewhere. In Rome itself, while direct sibling marriage was taboo, dynastic marriages within extended families, such as uncle-niece unions, became more common in the Julio-Claudian dynasty. Emperors like Caligula and Nero, who were often accused of incest, whether true or slander, reveal how deeply the memory of Ptolemaic practices haunted Roman political culture. In later monarchies, particularly in medieval and early modern Europe, dynastic intermarriage remained common, though usually among cousins. The Habsburgs, infamous for generations of inbreeding, reflected a principle not unlike the Ptolemies: keep power and wealth within the family at all costs. In the Islamic caliphates and Ottoman sultans' courts, sibling marriage never became policy, but dynastic control of succession through close kinship mirrored the logic of consolidation that once guided the Ptolemies. Symbol in popular imagination. In the centuries that followed, the image of sibling marriage became a literary and cultural motif. To medieval chroniclers, it confirmed the strangeness of the pagan world. To Renaissance artists, who rediscovered classical accounts, it added a layer of exotic allure to Cleopatra, turning her into both a cautionary tale and a symbol of sensual power. In modern scholarship and popular media, the Ptolemaic practice continues to fascinate because it sits at the intersection of taboo and necessity. Historians analyze it as political pragmatism. Novelists and filmmakers dramatize it as scandal and passion. In both modes, it keeps the Ptolemies alive in cultural memory, long after their dynasty's monuments have crumbled into dust. Sibling marriage among the Ptolemies was not simply a dynastic quirk. It was a political technology with enduring resonance. It symbolized Egypt's unique position as a cultural crossroads, where Greek rationalism met Egyptian sacred tradition. To later societies, it became a symbol of both fascination and repulsion, a reminder that power often bends morality, and that dynasties may sacrifice even the most intimate human bonds in pursuit of survival. In this way, The Ptolemies left behind not only monuments and libraries but also a legacy of contested memory, where sibling marriage remains the most infamous emblem of a dynasty that was brilliant, brutal, and unforgettable. What, then, did the Ptolemies leave behind? They ruled for nearly 3 centuries, longer than any other Hellenistic dynasty. They fused Greek and Egyptian traditions into a hybrid culture that produced temples, cities, and intellectual achievements still admired today. Alexandria became a beacon of learning, its influence lasting long after the dynasty itself. Their sibling marriages, shocking though they seemed, were not simply perversions. They were deliberate tools of statecraft, designed to guard legitimacy, project divinity, and exclude outsiders. In Egyptian eyes, they echoed the sacred unions of the gods. In Greek and Roman eyes, they symbolized decadence. Both perceptions were true. Yet these marriages also sowed the seeds of destruction. By turning inward, the dynasty cut itself off from useful alliances. By binding family and power so tightly, they magnified every quarrel into civil war. In the end, the dynasty collapsed not only under the weight of Roman power but under the burden of its own contradictions. Still, the Ptolemies fascinate us. Their story is one of grandeur and grotesquerie, of libraries and lighthouses, of golden blood. They remind us that power often comes wrapped in paradox, that the same traditions which exalt rulers can also destroy them, that the same marriages which sanctify can also corrupt. In their incestuous unions, the Ptolemies sought to be gods. Instead, they became a legend immortal not for their purity, but for their brilliance, their brutality, and their unforgettable attempt to live as divine siblings in a mortal world. The story of the Ptolemies doesn't end with sibling marriages. This was a dynasty of betrayal, assassinations, and blood-soaked feasts. In our next video, we'll uncover the palace intrigues, murders between brothers, queens who poisoned their rivals, and the king who was so cruel, his nickname still echoes through history. You won't want to miss it. Thank you for watching, and see you in our next video.